It's coming up to 11 minutes to the hour. This is Paris Live PM on Radio France International. We now turn our focus towards escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula. An American missile defense system intended to shoot down North Korean missiles has gone into operation in South Korea. China has demanded that the THAAD system be removed, while North Korea threatened to accelerate its nuclear weapons program. And to top this off, South Korea looks set to get its first liberal president in nearly a decade. Less than a week out from elections on May 9th, polls show that the Democratic Party's Moon Jae-in is going to win by a large margin. With us to help make sense of all of the rhetoric, what's at stake, and how people in South Korea feel about all of this is today's live guest, Antoine Bondaz, an Asia specialist with the Foundation for Strategic Research here in Paris. Thanks for coming back to the program.
Thank you.
Now, the threat of nuclear war and the standoff between the US and North Korea and China appears to have overshadowed these elections. Change is afoot. The impact of a liberal leader will be felt throughout the region, no doubt. And Moon Jae-in, the frontrunner, has pledged to boost cooperation with North Korea. Is the country, South Korea, about to be taken in a whole new direction?
That's actually very likely. And South Korea could get back to the so-called pro-engagement policy towards North Korea. It will have, indeed, a huge impact on inter-Korean relations. Since Moon Jae-in is actually likely to restart dialogue with North Korea and to resume economic cooperation that was basically cancelled with the closure of the Kaesong Inter-Korean Industrial Complex in February 2016. Still, Moon Jae-in cannot get back to the so-called sunshine policy that was actually implemented at the turn of the 2000 years. What is sure is there is two limits now. The nuclear program and ballistic program in North Korea have known tremendous development in the last decade. And second, the South Korean opinion now believes that North Korea is more a threat than 15 years ago. So it cannot get back to the sunshine policy, but still it will be a completely different policy from Park Geun-hye, foreign and former president policy, towards more dialogue and cooperation, at least on the economic level, with North Korea.
I want to talk about the THAAD missile system, which was hugely expensive. $1 billion, I think, is the estimate. Many South Koreans are opposed to it. There have been protests. Moon has said that he'll renegotiate the deal, which was agreed under his predecessor, Park Geun-hye, who's now very unpopular and will remind our listeners has been impeached. China says that the system undermines its own missile defense capabilities, and it's warned that there'll be consequences. Do you think that THAAD has any real future? And if it does remain in place, does it stand to do more harm than good for the South Korean people?
The THAAD is actually the symbol of the complicated relations and relationship that South Korea has to build with China and with the US, and how to find a balance between Beijing and Washington. What is sure is that the liberals have been opposed to the deployment of THAAD, but this is now deployed already. So it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get back and to go back on the agreement with the US without weakening the US and South Korea alliance. So it's very unlikely, actually, that Moon Jae-in, if he is elected next week, will go back on that decision and decide not to deploy it anymore. What's important for Moon Jae-in is still to improve the relationship with China. China, as you said, is very against the THAAD deployment because it believes that it weakens its second strike capabilities and its nuclear deterrence against the US. So Moon Jae-in will have to do something positive toward China. I don't think he can, once again, come back on the decision of the deployment, but maybe he can send like good signals to China, like a rapprochement with China and the economic and the political aspect, trying not to put so much pressure on North Korea anymore, trying not to have that many military exercises with the US. But the future of the THAAD, for the future of the THAAD, is very unlikely that it's not going to be deployed anymore.
Okay, and I do want to talk about the geopolitics, China, the US, South Korea, Russia, etc. But first I want to look at the main issues in this election campaign. What do South Korean people care about? I mean, there's obviously the issue, domestic issues, the reform of the family-run conglomerates, the chaebols. And people, I imagine, want more transparency in government after what happened with their president, Park Geun-hye. Given the fears that Kim Jong-un could trigger a sixth nuclear test, do you think that the focus in South Korea is perhaps shifting a little bit away from corruption, more towards national security?
I don't think so. The South Koreans are not used to the North Korean provocation and to the feeling of insecurity with North Korea. So there is a common and a growing agreement between parties that North Korea is indeed a threat and that it has to be solved in one way or another, and that South Korean security has to be improved. Still, the North Korean issue is not the main issue in the campaign. It's mostly a campaign about domestic politics, about, as you said, the morality of politics, the reform of the chaebol, and the future of South Korean economy. The unemployment rate in South Korea is rising, especially among the young people. There is a growing frustration among that category of South Korean, very highly educated, that have traveled a lot, that have made a lot of sacrifices to study in good university, etc., that cannot find a job. It's likely actually to trigger a political crisis in South Korea. And the Park Geun-hye scandal was only the top of the iceberg. So the next president will have to solve the society problem, the social problem, the economic problem. And North Korea today is no longer the top priority for the South Korean government.
The electorate is quite divided. You mentioned youth unemployment there. It seems that the young people are more liberals. They're the ones who are more likely to swing their support behind the Democratic Party candidate, whereas the older South Koreans who perhaps lived through the Korean War are more conservative.
That's true, but on the North Korean issue, the segmentation is completely different. Young people tend to be closer to the oldest people, considering North Korea as a threat. On the question, of course, of the reunification, it might be different. The older people are willing, of course, to unify the peninsula. For some of them, they've known the unified peninsula. But for the young people who have grown so-called a South Korean identity, they don't understand why they should pay, why they should make sacrifice to make the peninsula unify again. So on the north, the divide and the cleavages between South Korean population on the North Korean issue and on the economic issues are actually not the same. And the younger people are not that supportive of the pro-engagement policy towards North Korea. So that's a dilemma for Moon Jae-in. He's elected first on the economic and the social issues, not on the North Korean issues.
Sure. Now, these elections have, at least in one news report that I read, been described as a bit of a referendum on relations with the US. And the US seems to be a bit of a wild card in all of this. Things reached boiling point a month ago when Trump declared that he'd be prepared to act unilaterally against Pyongyang. Since then, he's said that he'd be willing to sit down with Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances. Now, we don't really know if the US strategy is it military action, is it sanctions, is it diplomacy? How are all of these mixed messages from the United States, what are they doing to America's reputation in South Korea?
The situation in 2017 is completely different from the situation in 2002, where the alliance was tested by the candidate No Mu-yeon, saying basically what is the problem of being anti-American in South Korea. Today, there is an agreement that the US-South Korea alliance is the key to protect the South Korean people. So there is no much so-called anti-Americanism in South Korea anymore. But still, what Trump has been doing for the last few weeks is weakening the alliance. There is a growing anxiety in South Korea that Trump might go alone, that is more unilateral than President Obama. President Trump has never said in his tweets that he has to discuss it with his South Korean and Japanese allies. And Trump seems even to be closer to the Japanese on the North Korean issue than to the South Korean. So there is a growing anxiety in South Korea. But I don't believe that the impact of Moon Jae-in election, if he is elected, will be as big as the impact of the 2002 election of No Mu-yeon, the former president he used actually to advise.
Okay, well, I guess we'll find out. Only time will tell. We've run out of time. Our thanks there to Asia specialist Antoine Bondaz.